People ask me what I think about standing out there. 8 hours. Rifle at my side, bearskin straight, eyes on the middle distance, and the whole civilian world flowing past me like a river around a stone. They expect the answer to be nothing, that the discipline is a kind of emptiness, that I've trained myself out of thought. The honest answer is that I notice everything. That morning started the way most mornings at the processional gate started. The autumn light coming in low over the Keldrath roofline, the public tour window open from 9 to 11, and a cluster of civilians working their way along the south forecourt with a palace guide, a young woman named Petra, who knew the routes and the protocols and handled the tourists with a patience I respected. The group was small that day, a retired schoolteacher from the northern provinces, a young couple with a pram, an older man in an expensive coat who watched everything with the careful eyes of a man who calculates value in real time, and his security contractor. His name, I would learn later, was Marin Sold, mid-40s, heavy through the chest, the kind of man who carries himself in a way that announces he has been, at some point in his career, important, and has not yet made peace with the idea that this posting escorting a wealthy client on a palace tour may not qualify. He wore a dark coat, an earpiece he'd clearly chosen to leave visible, and the particular expression of a man who has decided that ceremonial things are an insult to practical ones. He looked at me the way a person looks at furniture. I marked him from the moment the group cleared the gate arch. 14 years at various postings teaches you to read a crowd the way you read ground. What's solid, what shifts, what has the potential to give way under you? The school teacher was curious and a little awed. The young couple were managing the pram and barely watching. The man in the expensive coat was assessing the architecture. Solt was assessing me, and not because he was impressed. The guide brought the group to a point about 6 meters from my post, the approved viewing distance, marked in the forecourt plan, known to every guide who works the palace circuit. She was explaining the regiment's history. I was on the eastward leg of my march, which brings me to within 2 meters of the approved line, turns me and takes me back. 93 steps. I know the count the way a musician knows a bar of music. Solt stepped forward past the approved line, not by much, a half meter. He was looking at his phone. The guide said, quietly and pleasantly, that guests were asked to remain behind the marked area. Solt didn't look up. He took another half step. I noted the position. I did not break stride. On my return leg, as I completed the turn and came back east, he was standing in my path, not by accident. He had calculated the march line, and he had placed himself across it. Not close enough to constitute a physical obstruction requiring immediate action, but close enough that I would need to deviate or halt. He was looking at his client now, saying something. The phone was away. He was performing indifference, and the performance was meant for me. I halted at the prescribed distance. 14 years teaches you the distance, too. He turned then, as if noticing me for the first time, and his expression arranged itself into something between amusement and impatience. He said, "You can go around." The guide said his name. He waved a hand at her without looking. "Seriously," he said to me, "I'm not in your way. Just step around." A pause. "It's a big forecourt." I said nothing. I held my position. My eyes were level, my rifle was grounded, my breathing was even. School teacher had taken a small step back. The young couple had stopped talking. "All right," Solt said, and now there was an edge in it. The edge of a man who has decided that being ignored is a personal slight. I get it. Very disciplined, very professional. You're the best-dressed prop on the grounds. He said it loudly enough that his client could hear. He meant it to land. Someone paid a lot of money to dress you up and stand you out here, and I respect that, I do. But I'm asking politely, and I think you can hear me, so move. He stepped forward and placed a hand on my left shoulder. Not hard. Not a shove. The touch of a man who assumes that physical contact will accomplish what words could not. That it will remind me I have a body. That body's move. I did not move. He held his hand there for perhaps 3 seconds, looking at me with something that was trying to be patience and was becoming something else. Then he removed the hand, looked at his client, looked back at me, squared his shoulders. "You know what?" he said. "Fine." He planted his right foot across the march line, directly in front of me, arms at his sides, chin up. A man who has decided to make his point with his body. I had at this point signaled the duty position twice. The second signal is embedded in a specific halt posture that every member of the Keldrath 1st Regiment knows, and every visitor does not. It looks like nothing. It is not nothing. It is a flag, and it was red. I looked at Marin Sold. Through him, the way you look through a window. He held the eye contact. He had the expression of a man who has spent years winning staring contests with people who needed something from him. And he believed this was the same contest. It was not the same contest. Lieutenant Cassell arrived from the gate duty station in under 90 seconds. Cassell is a precise, careful officer who moves quietly and states things once. He came to a position beside the forecourt line and addressed Sold by the name on his access credential, which told Sold, if he was paying attention, that Cassell knew exactly who he was and had looked before he walked over. "Sir," Cassell said, "guests are required to remain behind the access line. I'll need to ask you to step back." Sold turned, took in the uniform, the rank tabs, the deliberate stillness. Something recalibrated behind his eyes. "I was trying to get your man there to move around me," he said. "He wouldn't deviate." "He won't," Cassell said. "That's correct. So the protocol is that the tourists work around him." "The protocol," Cassell said, "is that the guard holds his post and march pattern, and visitors remain behind the access line. The line is marked." A short silence. "He put his hands on me," Solt said. This was the kind of thing a man says when he has lost the argument and wants to locate a new one. It was not true, and everyone present knew it was not true. Cassell looked at him for a moment. "I'll need to see your access documentation, please." The documentation came out, a laminated visitor credential issued through a private touring company that contracts with the palace for small, high net worth groups. Cassell looked at it with the attention he gives to everything, which is more attention than most people budget for small documents. He turned it over. He looked at the validation date on the rear. He looked at the issuing office stamp. "This credential was issued through the Haverfeld Touring Group," Cassell said. "The Haverfeld contract specifies that contracted security staff accompanying guests are bound by the same access conditions as the guests themselves. Contact with palace personnel in their ceremonial duties is a breach of those conditions." Solt looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means," Cassell said, "that your access for today is revoked. I'll need to ask you and your client to leave the forecourt. A member of the visitor services team will accompany you to the gate." The client, who had been standing very still and very quietly for the last several minutes, said something in a low voice to Solt. Solt's jaw moved. He looked once more in my direction, not with the amusement anymore, and not with the impatience. Something more considered. Then he pocketed the credential and followed the visitor services officer toward the Aldenmere gate without another word. The schoolteacher watched them go with the expression of a woman who has seen this particular type of man before and is not sorry to see him leave. The young couple had resumed their quiet conversation by the pram. Petra, the guide, reorganized the group with a professionalism I noted and will not forget, and continued the tour at the prescribed distance. I resumed my march. 93 steps. The count was the same. I should tell you something about the Aldenmere Ridge. I don't tell most people. There is no utility in it, and the kind of man who volunteers his own history at the first sign of difficulty is not the kind of man I have tried to be. What happened in the Aldenmere stays in the Aldenmere in sealed ministry files, in the briefings that senior officers give to one another in quiet rooms, and in the weight I carry on every post I've ever held, which I have become so accustomed to carrying that it no longer feels like weight. It feels like posture. The operation doesn't have a public name. Inside the regiment, it's called the Ridge, and when older NCOs mention it, they mention it the way men mention things they are glad they did not have to do themselves. We went in as a 12-man unit attached to a joint ministry task, clearance work, the kind that gets described in paperwork as environmental assessment, and does not in any way resemble environmental assessment. The terrain was steep and wet, and the intelligence was wrong in 2 of the 3 ways that matter most. We held our position for 6 days in conditions that I will not detail here because the detail serves no purpose, and on the 6th day I walked back to the extraction point. I was the only one who did. Colonel Rhys Aldane, who commands the Keldrath 1st Regiment, and has held that command for 11 years, knows this. He was one of the officers who signed my transfer to ceremonial duties when I requested it, not as a demotion, not as a punishment, but as the thing I needed, which was a post that required discipline and silence and the holding of a line. He signed it the same afternoon I asked, and he has never once suggested I should have chosen differently. I found out later that he was in the South Forecourt that morning, not inspecting. He sometimes walks the public areas during the civilian tour window. He says it keeps him honest about what the regiment looks like from the outside. He saw the last part of what happened with Sold, and he was there when Cassell walked them to the Aldenmere gate. He told me, later that afternoon, what Sold had said at the gate, a last remark, the kind of exit line a man produces when he wants to feel he has not entirely lost. Something about the regiment being good at playing dress-up. Aldane told me what he had said in response. He'd said nothing for a moment. just looked at Solt with the patience of a man who has been looking at difficult things for a long time. Then he said quietly that the corporal at the processional gate had survived the Aldenmere Ridge, and that Solt might want to take a moment with that information before he finished his sentence. Solt had finished his sentence. Aldane let him. Then he said 12 men went in. One came out. If you find yourself with a thought about what that uniform is for, I'd encourage you to let it pass. I don't know what Solds faced it after that. I wasn't there. But Aldane, who's not a man who editorializes, said that Sold did not produce a follow-up remark, and that he left the forecourt in the direction of his vehicle without looking back. People ask me what I think about standing out there. Here is what I thought about that afternoon after I had completed my watch and turned the post to the evening shift and walked through the inner gate and stood in the narrow corridor that connects the ceremonial yards to the regiment's working quarters, where it is quiet and slightly cold and smells of stone and oil and wool. I thought about the 6 men who should be standing posts somewhere and are not. I thought about what it cost and what it purchased and whether those two things balance. And the answer I've come to, over 14 years of standing still while the world moved past me, is that I am not the one who gets to decide whether they balance. My part was to come back. My part every day since is to hold the post. Marin Solt saw a man dressed up to stand still, and he was not entirely wrong. That is part of the job. The stillness, the uniform, the march pattern counted in steps. These are real. He just missed the rest of it. He missed the part where the stillness is chosen, where a man who has been in places that move very fast and very badly, and has seen what happens when discipline breaks, decides that the most honest thing he can do with what's left of his service is hold a line in perfect silence, and hold it without fail, regardless of who thinks it's decorative. That afternoon, with the autumn light falling long across the forecourt and the civilian tour window closed, for the day I stood my post. I have never once abandoned it, and I do not intend to start.